conservatism became a little more hostile towards the trends in American history and historiography. And that really wasn't a big deal. And it wasn't a big deal until about 2000, just before that. And this you got to lay at the feet of people like Rush Limbaugh. Because Rush Limbaugh said that there were 4 pillars of deceit. And those pillars, if I can remember them, are science, the government, the media, and academia. And so whatever academia was doing, somehow it was involved in manipulating minds. It was brainwashing. And in the last 4 years, that thing that used to be just a quip that you would hear every once in a while has become a resounding roar that we are manipulating you. We are brainwashing. And it's placed people in the humanities on the defensive, that the way that we've been reared in our studies and how we've gone through the dissertating and research and everything we know is essentially under attack as a manipulation of the American left to change the fabric of American culture in order to make this new socialist beast. And we call ourselves progressive, and as we call ourselves progressive, what we're really doing is we're throwing off the things that made us exceptionally American, or in the greater case of the humanities, exceptionally Western. And again, that was an academic charge. We were getting that from the Heritage Foundation. We were getting that from the Hoover. But with Limbaugh, this has become this kind of blue-collar, white-collar induced scream that we hear over and over again. And I started noticing it on campus particularly with Turning Point USA, with the emails I was getting from some students. And a lot of students are being very candid about their parents worried for them when they enter college. So this 7076 commission is that rage in the form of what seems to be a scholarly publication. But it is really that rage. It's those on the outside who believe that they should still be on the inside, trying to dictate what American history should look like. First thing I have to do is disrupt the status quo and myth bust here. And so every time I stand in front of the classroom and every time I give something to read, it is about disrupting the status quo. It is not in any way intended to have an answer regurgitated to me. In fact, I don't have tests anymore. I see them as unethical because I don't want a correct answer. I want the process of thinking and then the reflection on what that thing meant. And that also, this administration, as far as ethics go, it changed the way I ethically look at history. Who'd heard of the Boston Massacre? Every student heard of the Boston Massacre. How many people were killed? A handful. Okay, who has heard of the Tulsa Massacre? What? The Tulsa riots, 1920, 21, dates. Maybe 300 dead, we don't know. An entire portion of the city burned to the ground, the churches, the orphanages, the movie theaters, and then men, women, and children just rummaging through anything that can be taken, and employing planes. They barely invented planes yet. And they used them to firebomb the black section of town. Who had heard of this? No one. Not one student. Your AP history course kids? No. Everyone. How many US history courses had they taken? And so what they had heard was Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks. Those are the two people that faced challenges and fixed the problem. And the polls showed this. Most white people believed things like the civil rights era was over and it succeeded. Almost 80%. Where 80% of African Americans had the exact opposite. We had these two different realities. And I realized that in teaching, that white reality was the reality of curriculum. And so then it did become this issue of how do we recast the relationship between the student and the citizen and the nation state? I really try to convey to my students. The first is every single person in this classroom, I tell them, has had a law directly against them. A law that was there to prohibit something from some advantage, an opportunity. It was a law to keep you from having an opportunity. If you are a woman, clearly that there are a litany of laws. If you are non-white, I can read you the laws. There was never a law against white men just for being white men. There were laws against communists. There were laws against unionists, but they were not based on the race of the person. Every other group had it. And then I challenged my students. I challenged them. If you could find an insult, you insult me on the grounds of my gender and my race. I'm a white guy. What's the word you're going to use that is going to cut me, that is going to devastate me? And is there a word that I could use against you? And the classes, and I've had classes where we've really gotten into this, and yes, it's gotten fairly crass and profane, but an exercise in something important here. And it became comical because the things that they were lobbing at me became so absurd because they had no teeth whatsoever. Because that didn't just happen. That's a reflection of the status quo, and that is a reflection of our particular history. The whole idea of the cowboy and the pioneer, this is absolutely the foundation of white nationalism. We got to see what happens when you take these people who have that Germanic seed, even Frederick Jackson Turner called it something like this, the Teutonic seed, and you drop them in the American forest, and what are they going to do? They're going to dominate. And they're going to walk across the country, and they're going to create this world just like it happened before. And the pioneer became that Volk. And you don't say bad things about Little House on the Prairie. You don't say bad things about the pioneer. But the pioneer history, and the pioneer comes from French. It's like peon. It's for foot soldier. And it's a really good way to look at what a pioneer is. Yes, they lived a hard life. Yes, they had challenges. Yes, they died. They did that, all these things, but they were foot soldiers. And our memories of them, these pioneer trails, Madonna of the Plains, all these statues came up in the early 20th century in order to commemorate what great white people did along the trail. And the other thing that this hides is what word do we use to describe the relationship between natives and white pioneers, and natives and the American government? And in California, it's pretty clear that word's genocide. And there's the other thing about local, and there's also the other thing about American history, is we exist in this place called Fresno State. And every time we walk across that campus, just like every time we walk from our house to our car to our whatever, we're walking on the ground of genocide. Genocide was committed here. And then you have irony. And this is where I will get into a ton of trouble. Good trouble, I think. We have monuments about genocide on the campus of Fresno State, sitting on a location of genocide that is not recognized. I would love to see the day where we didn't have monuments to people and we had monuments to ideas and concepts. You don't just put up Johnny Rebel in your hometown. That didn't happen right after the Civil War. That happened when the United Daughters of the Confederacy were recasting the Civil War as a war of states' rights and not a war about race and slavery. And they were trying to make it something that it wasn't. They were creating a false history. When you have Calhoun's the funniest one. Let's go back to Calhoun in a second. But yes, these Confederate generals, all of these things were put up by these elite people trying to recast history and in a very real way remind everyone around them who's in charge. You are Black walking underneath that statue every day on your way to work. Like the Confederate flag that's now over the State House, that hasn't been flying there for 50 years, but now is up again. That is a reminder. And then you can't, then to turn around and say, no, this is history. No, that's not history. That's a reenactment of history. It's those on the outside who believe that they should still be on the inside, trying to dictate what American history should look like. No, the founders were not abolitionists. They were people who were engaged in this Enlightenment project. They saw themselves as the elite. They saw themselves as the intellectual because they were the intellectual elite for the most part. Of the conflicts they were having was, how do we possibly preach this issue of freedom when in fact we're dealing with owning slaves? And pragmatism had to come in. They had to sacrifice this idea of freeing everyone in order to form this somewhat perfect union as much as they could. So they have it in this way that we have these practically divine beings who are able to reinvent government and the world and the notion of freedom. Yet somehow they're still people of their time. And then they don't really move outside of little pockets throughout the country to address the issue of slavery. And most of the time, and what's not said is that most of the people who had a problem with slavery did not have a problem with enslaving people and did not have a problem with enslaving African Americans. They had a problem with competition, and they had a problem with competition with white workers. That slavery moving into all of these other areas was going to be bad for white workers. They're going to take jobs away from them. I think we've heard this one before and hear it after over and over again. They're going to take jobs away. And so it was about free white labor over and over and over again, never really about equality. When you get these it was the last 4 years and before, the counterfactual world, where the things that are so evidently true are no longer true. That fact as you see it happen can be dismissed, and people believe it, and they enter an alternative reality. I mean, how many times did we hear Donald Trump say something damning, and then a couple days later claim that he never said that? We have the video evidence. You did that thing. Everyone's watching. We all heard. It's in the books. But then you'll have 30 to 40% of Americans saying that, no, that's fake news. That's just a lie. And everything about that is a lie. And so the notion of I never thought that truth would be so undermined. I thought that it was going to be something that at least had some stability. And to find out that no, it did not. We've been thrown into a culture war that we didn't start. Like, we're not throwing the bombs. we're just trying to make sense of it all. And we do have we're being shelled all the time, saying that we're actually on the attack. Like, how are we attacking? Oh, and by the way, we're not the elite. We are teaching cops and nurses and teachers and middle management and the people that are going into administration. And that's what we do. And we do it knowing what we do, happily. Victor Davis Hanson on the 7076 Commission, he can talk about the ivory tower people and the ill-informed elite and how disassociated and distant we are from the human experience because his father owned a farm. As he sits at Stanford University, hanging out with the rest of with Condoleezza Rice, right? We are not the elite. We're not the billionaires. We don't have golden toilets. The 1776 project, I think we should bury it. And I'm thinking in terms of algorithm. Anytime you repeat, and I'm not on Twitter, so I only know this secondhand, but when you retweet and repost, all that does is move up in the algorithm. So it will multiply and multiply and multiply. Yeah, it should be addressed somehow, but posting it and giving more fuel to it, that seems intuitive, but probably counterproductive. We can't give credence to bad history. And what we have to do is, in history and far as ethics, is that we as professors are accountable. I can't believe that I'm at the point now that I think we should be teaching empathy. What has become of me? Who is this guy? We need to be pushing and advocating for coalition building.